This is a very good friend of ours. Sergeant Jerry Hill of the Dallas Police Department. Jerry Hill was one of the 6 men who apprehended Lee Oswald this afternoon at the Texas Theater. Jerry, recount how this situation started and what happened.
We first got into the situation when we received a call that the president had been shot, and for us to report to the location of the shooting at Elm and Houston Street. When we got to this location, a search of the building revealed that...
Jerry, they're going to bring the
all right,
suspect
Jim,
up.
we'll do it later.
Yeah.
This is Sergeant Gerald Hill, an important actor in the Kennedy assassination, and he deserves a big video. From his Warren Commission testimony, were you on duty on November 22nd, 1963? Yes, sir, I was. Where were you on duty? I was on special assignment, detached from the Police Patrol Division and assigned to the Police Personnel Office investigating applicants for the police department. So on the day of the assassination, Sergeant Gerald Hill was on special assignment. And while on special assignment, he was working directly under Captain Westbrook, who is also an interesting actor in this case and probably deserves his own big video. Westbrook was very much involved with the activities in Oak Cliff after the assassination, and here he is with Sergeant Croy, apparently pointing to and examining a wallet found on the scene. And interestingly, even though Captain Westbrook was the ranking officer on the scene in Oak Cliff, his face never appears in the television footage. So Sergeant Hill was normally a sergeant in the patrol division, but he was on special assignment for the assassination. And Sergeant Hill tells the Warren Commission something about his background. Then what did you do when you got out of high school? Went to work for the Dallas Times-Herald. Worked there from January of 1948 until April of 1954. At the time I resigned there, I was radio-television editor for the newspaper. Went from there to the Dallas Bureau of WBAP-TV in Fort Worth, and worked for them until March the 21st, 1958. The last 2 weeks I was working for them, I was attending the police academy for the police department. Then you went in the police department? I went with the police prior to quitting. I turned in my notice with WBAP, and they let me work it out while I attended the police school because I was actually hired on a Saturday, and the police school started on Monday. And I wanted to leave on good terms with one place and start to school on time with the other, so they worked out an agreement with me. So Gerald Hill was with WBAP before he became a cop, and that's probably why the news clown here refers to him as a very good friend.
This is a very good friend of ours, Sergeant Jerry Hill of the Dallas Police Department.
And I think it's interesting that it is the WBAP camera we see, Jerry Hill having worked for WBAP before he became a cop. It's the WBAP camera we see that enters the basement just before Oswald is shot, and with which at least one of the police officers thought Jack Ruby had snuck into the basement. So I find it suggestive that Jerry Hill had worked for WBAP before he became a cop. He would have connections with WBAP, and if WBAP's camera were to be utilized in a conspiracy, he would have the connections needed to make the arrangements. And according to this FBI report, Jerry Hill also knew Jack Ruby. Sergeant Jerry Hill, Personnel Office, Dallas Police Department, advised that he became acquainted with Jack Ruby approximately 10 years ago when he, Hill, was employed as an amusement writer for the Dallas Times-Herald. and he advised Ruby ran the Silver Spur, also known as the Paddy Club, on South Irvay. He stated he had no close contact with Ruby for the first few years and became more closely acquainted with Ruby when he opened the Carousel Club on Commerce Street in Dallas, and he, Hill, was assigned duty in the downtown district. He stated that he recalled shortly after Ruby opened the Carousel Club, he employed 3 Turkish dancers whose appearances only lasted 2 days. He stated the dancers were taken into custody and deported by the immigration officials. He stated that he recalled having talked with Earl Norman, a former master of ceremonies for Ruby, who stated that one time the question on the Mississippi integration problems was being discussed, and that Ruby expressed his opinion that any decisions which were made by the United States government should be abided by, and that anyone who opposed the government or took the law into their own hands was wrong. So this FBI report shows us that Jerry Hill knew Jack Ruby for a long time before the assassination. And we have this document from the Garrison investigation, an interview with Harry Olson, who had been a police officer at the time of the assassination. And it says here, Olson advised that a patrolman named Bill Swafford was a frequent visitor to the carousel. Bill Swafford's name doesn't come up much in the assassination, and there's not enough information to connect him to anything that I've been able to find. But anyway, getting to Jerry Hill, the most frequent visitor, he said, was Jerry Hill, the sergeant who found shell casings at the Tippit shooting scene and was at the Texas Theater, to whom Ruby was always giving 6 packs of beer. Hill escorted FBI men to persons around the carousel locale and told the persons, "Tell the FBI what you know about Ruby." Olson says that one of these persons cracked, "Why don't you? You knew him best." It is noted that Hill was not questioned by the commission vis-a-vis Ruby. So this Olson story indicates that Ruby got along really well with Jerry Hill. And so Jerry would be the man if you needed to put Jack Ruby together with a WBAP camera. He would be a man who could make the arrangements on both sides of that. Sergeant Hill tells the Warren Commission that he heard on the radio that the president had been shot. When he was at the police station, he heard this. And here he says, "At this time, I went back to the personnel office and told the captain that Inspector Sawyer requested assistance at Elm and Houston Streets. The captain," and this is Captain Westbrook, "the captain said, 'Go ahead and go.' And he turned to another man in the office named Joe Fields and told him to get on down there. I got on the elevator on the 3rd floor and went to the basement and saw a uniformed officer named Jim M. Valentine. And I asked Jim what he was doing, and he said nothing in particular. And I said, 'I need you to take me down to Elm Street. The president has been shot.' We started out of the basement to get in his car, and a boy named Jim Ewell with the Dallas Morning News had parked his car in the basement and was walking up and asked us what was going on, and we told him the president was shot, and he said, 'Where are you going?' And we said, 'Down to Elm and Houston, where they think the shots came from.' And he said, 'Could I go with you?' So we took him in the back seat of the car, and I don't remember what the number was." And what he means here is he doesn't remember what the number of the police car was. And it's interesting that he says this because nobody asked him what the number of the car was. This has not been an issue in the Warren Commission testimony here, what the number of the car was. And yet Sergeant Hill volunteers the information that he doesn't know what the number of the car was, as if Sergeant Hill knows that's an important matter. And I think it is an important matter. And the fact that Hill, without being asked, said that he didn't know what the number of the car was means he doesn't want to tell the Warren Commission what the number of the car was, even though he does know what the number was. And it was Jim Valentine's car, so this is information that could have been obtained anyway, but Jerry Hill didn't obtain it, apparently. This is a frame from a film taken on the day of the assassination, and it shows Sergeant Hill arriving. Sergeant Hill is the one standing up there, getting out of the car, behind the car door, on which the number of the car appears. And that number is 207. So even though Sergeant Hill didn't know what the number of the car was, we know that the car's number was 207, and this is the scene Jerry Hill described. That's Hill in the car driven by Valentine, and Jim Ewell is in the back seat of the car. He's about to get out, too. So the car number is 207. And Sergeant Hill of the Dallas Police Department lied under oath to the Warren Commission when he preemptively said, I don't remember what the number was. Of course he remembered what the number was, but he wasn't going to say what the number was, and he wanted the Warren Commission to know that so that they wouldn't even ask him. And the reason the number of the car is important is because Earlene Roberts, the housekeeper at the rooming house where Oswald was living, saw this police car outside of the rooming house just after Oswald came into the rooming house after the assassination. And the shills and the idiots who pretend to want to know what happened on the day of the assassination don't believe her. Here we have some really good information that helps us to understand what happened on the day of the assassination, and the shills and the idiots discount this information because they are shills and they are idiots. 1 week after the assassination, Earlene Roberts talked to the FBI and told them that she saw Jerry's car out front, Sergeant Gerald Hill's car, out front on the day of the assassination after Oswald had come into the house. Mrs. Earlene Roberts, 1026 Beckley, Dallas, Texas, advised she could not furnish the exact time that Oswald returned to his room at 1026 Beckley after the assassination of the president, but said a rough guess would be 1 p.m. Mrs. Roberts received a telephone call from a friend telling her the president had just been shot, and Mrs. Roberts turned on the television and recalled the announcer saying President Kennedy had just been shot and was at Parkland Hospital. Mrs. Roberts advised after Oswald had entered his room at about 1 p.m., on November 22, 1963, she looked out the front window and saw a police car, number 207, with 2 uniformed policemen in the car, which slowed up and stopped in front of the residence at 1026 Beckley. And one of the officers blew the horn on the car and then drove slowly on Beckley towards Zangs Boulevard. Mrs. Roberts said the reason she recalled the number of the car was because she had worked for 2 policemen who drove squad car 170, and she looked to see if these were the 2 officers she knew parked in front of the residence. And later on, months later, Warren Commission attorney Joseph Ball questioned Earlene Roberts. Did a police car pass the house there and honked? Now notice Mr. Ball's question sets this up as if the police car is just driving by, not as if it's parked in front of the house. And this is something the shills and idiots enjoy because they like to pretend the same thing, that the car did not stop and park there. But anyway, let me read this. Did a police car pass the house there and honked? Yes. When was that? He came in the house. He is Oswald here. When he came in the house? When he came in the house and went to his room, you know how the sidewalk runs? Yes. Right direct in front of that door, there was a police car stopped and honked. So she's saying that after Oswald came into the house, she looked out and saw this police car parked in front of the house. To me, the implication of this is that Oswald came to the house in the police car. I think it's a pretty damn clear implication. I had worked for some policemen, and sometimes they come by and tell me something that maybe their wives would want me to know. And I thought it was them, and I just glanced out and saw the number, and I said, "Oh, that's not their car," for I knew their car. "You mean it was not the car of the policeman you knew?" It wasn't the police car I knew, because their number was 170, and it wasn't 170, and I ignored it. Where was it parked? It was parked in front of the house at 1026 North Beckley. And then they just eased on. The way it is, it was the third house off of Zhang's, and they just went on around the corner that way. Went around what corner? Went around the corner off Beckley on Zhang's. Which way? Toward town or away from town? Toward town. Which way was the car facing? It was facing north. Towards Zhang's? Towards Zhang's. For I was the third house right off of Zhang's on Beckley. Did this police car stop directly in front of your house? Yes, it stopped directly in front of my house. And it just tip, and that's the way Officer Alexander and Charles Burnley would do when they stopped. And I went to the door and looked and saw it wasn't their number. Now, I put the red here, of course. It's not emphasized in the original Warren Commission testimony. But just to emphasize, I want to emphasize that this car, according to Early and Roberts, stopped in front of the house. And the first red sentence there, it was parked in front of the house. So the implication I get from this, and she wasn't questioned to determine whether this was the fact or not, but the implication I get is that when she looked, that car was stopped out in front of the house as if it had let Oswald out and before he went into the house. That's the way I read it. So what I'm saying is that these police in the car that brought Jerry Hill to the Texas School Book Depository, these police brought Oswald to his rooming house from the Texas School Book Depository and are honking the horn because they want him to hurry on up and get out because they've got stuff to do. Where was Oswald when this happened? In his room. It was after he had come in his room? Yes. So this is what I'm saying, that the car, the policeman, brought Oswald to his rooming house, let him out. Oswald went into his room, and while he was in his room, they honked the horn because they wanted him to hurry on up and get back out to the car so they could bring him to the next location. And after this, Early and Roberts says the car drove off around the corner, and I think it probably went around the block. There's a park there that forms this block, and it probably came back for Oswald. Roberts said that Oswald, when he came out of his room, went outside and stood on the sidewalk where the bus stop is, and that's the last she saw of him. So I think probably the car came back and picked him up there where the bus stop was and brought him probably to the east end of 10th Street so that he could go to the scene of the shooting on 10th Street as if he had got off the bus, as I explained in my last video. And I didn't mention the Whaley cab ride. I think that didn't happen, but I didn't mention that in the bus video because I thought that video was long enough already. But anyway, that's what I think happened. I think Oswald was being ferried around by the Dallas police, Jerry Hill specifically, and they were doing this because he was very important to the setup, and they didn't want to take a chance that he disappeared or that he went off script and went and did something they didn't know about and someone might have seen him there. They wanted to be very careful controlling Oswald at this point because they were setting him up to be the shooter of the president and of J.D. Tippit. And if something happened to Oswald, their plan wouldn't work, so they had to keep tight control of Oswald, and that's why the Dallas police are driving him around after the assassination. And Mr. Ball continues here, obviously aware of the importance of the number 207. Did you report that number to anyone? Did you report this incident to anyone? Yes, I told the FBI and the Secret Service both when they was out there. And did you tell the number of the car? I'm not sure. I believe I did. I'm not sure. I think I did because there was so much happened then until my brains was in a whirl. On the 29th of November, Special Agents Will Griffin and James Kennedy of the Federal Bureau of Investigation interviewed you, and you told them that after Oswald had entered his room at about 1 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, you looked out the front window and saw police car number 207. Number 107. Is that the number? Yes, I remembered it. I don't know where I got that 106, 207. Anyway, I knew it wasn't 170. And you saw that there were two uniformed policemen in the car? Yes, and it was in a black car. It wasn't an accident squad car at all. Were there two uniformed policemen in the car? Oh, yes. All right, here are the shills and idiots. They like to try to make hay with this. The fact that months later, when she's interviewed by the Warren Commission, she doesn't remember the number of the car she saw that one time in front of the house. They like to pretend this means that Early and Roberts did not see car 207. But the fact is that the earliest report we have on the record says that Early and Roberts said the car number was 207. And I think it's terribly unlikely that she would pick Jerry Hill's car if it wasn't really Jerry Hill's car. And so I think it was 207. So the shills and the idiots, and not just the current shills and idiots, but even back in the day, Hugh Ainsworth tried to make Early and Roberts look like she didn't know what she was talking about. And then, of course, later on, Gerald Posner did the same thing. But the reason they bothered is because this is very important. This tells us what happened. This tells us that Oswald got to the rooming house by means of a police car. And, of course, they have to hide that. And the shills and the idiots know damn well. Well, the shills know damn well what they're doing. The idiots are just idiots. And another thing they like to make, like to emphasize here is that Early and Roberts said there were two uniformed policemen in the car. People very often make mistakes. It could very well be one uniformed police officer and another officer not in uniform. I mean, if you see two people in a police car and you notice one has a uniform, you might just assume or remember that the other one was wearing a uniform too, even if he wasn't. And, of course, the shills and the idiots are happy to point out the unreliability of witnesses on little points like that. But they have to say that it means she didn't see anything at all. She's hallucinating, which, of course, is ridiculous. Of course she saw a police car out front. And her first recounting of the number was that it was car number 207. And that is the best evidence we have as to what she saw. So she saw Jerry Hill's car out in front of the house after Oswald walked in. And I think that means Jerry Hill and Jim Valentine gave Oswald a ride to the rooming house. Because the evidence tells us the last place Oswald we know he was at was the Texas School Book Depository, and the last place we know that car was at the Texas School Book Depository. And then Early and Roberts sees that car out front of her house after Oswald comes in. I think the implication is very clear here. Of course, the Dallas police investigated this matter. They were told to investigate it. The matter of what car Early and Roberts could have seen outside of her house when Oswald came in. And they did a ridiculous job investigating it. They obviously weren't trying. Of course, they were investigating themselves, so what do we expect? And since this was Jimmy Valentine's car, we have to deal with Valentine in relation to Hill. And this Dallas police document shows that Gerald Hill, prior to his going on special assignment for the assassination, had been Jimmy Valentine's police sergeant on the the shift that Jimmy Valentine worked. So Hill certainly had the opportunity to know Jimmy Valentine very well, since he was his commanding officer. And here we're looking at Valentine's activity on the police radio just prior to the assassination. Jimmy Valentine is number 104. He calls in and says, "I'm clear, I'll handle that prisoner." Now, there had been some conversation on the radio about needing to pick up a shoplifting suspect at Main and Nerve. And apparently Jimmy Valentine heard that and volunteered to go pick up the suspect. And this is 45 minutes or so before JFK is shot. And then a few minutes later, Valentine's back on the radio and he says, "I'm tied up in this traffic up here and I got 1 million people. I don't know when I'm going to get that prisoner out of H.L. Green's." So here he's starting to say he doesn't know whether he's going to get the prisoner or not. And it's not his prerogative as the patrolman dispatched to do something to make a decision like that. But it sounds, and then he changes what he says. He says when, because he realizes he shouldn't be saying, "I don't know whether I'm going to be able to get him or not." To me, this implies that Jimmy Valentine knows that he's going to be needed soon. He and his car are going to be needed soon to give Jerry Hill a ride to the Texas School Book Depository and to give Oswald a ride to Oak Cliff. And this is a half an hour before the assassination. So this implies foreknowledge on the part of Valentine that there's a big event going on that he's going to be needed for. And he starts to say he doesn't know whether he's going to be able to get the prisoner. So I think that's revealing. But apparently Valentine does get the prisoner and bring him to the police station. At 12:06, he says 104 remains out, and the dispatcher says, 104, you'll have to come in, make your left turn in Main into the basement. So this implies that Jimmy Valentine is at the police station with his prisoner. The implication here is that Valentine is about to enter the city hall basement with his shoplifter prisoner, and this is the last we hear from him on the radio, and until about 12:45, when he hears that the president was shot, according to an FBI report of an interview with him. And this brings him to the police station where Jerry Hill says he saw him and he had nothing in particular to do. Of course, Jimmy Valentine denied that he had driven car 207 to Oak Cliff. This is a report or a Dear Chief letter from Captain Westbrook, who, of course, was investigating this matter. And it gives the official story. Officer J.M. Valentine was operating car number 207, and this car was parked at Houston and Elm, the Texas School Book Depository, and Valentine was assisting in the search of the school depository building. The keys of car 207 were given to Sergeant J.A. Putnam, along with keys from other cars parked in the immediate vicinity, and released to the 3rd Platoon Commander at the City Hall at approximately 3:30 p.m. So what's implied here is that the car, 207, was at the Texas School Book Depository from about 12:50, when it arrived there, until 3:30 p.m. And, of course, that's good enough for the shills and the idiots. The Warren Commission did interview Sergeant Putnam, the guy that supposedly Valentine had given the keys to car 207 to when he went to the Texas School Book Depository, but Putnam was not asked about the keys to car 207, of course. And apparently Sergeant Putnam is not the finest of characters, so I'm not sure I'd believe anything he said anyway, even if he had been asked. But he wasn't. Now, because Patrolman Valentine is tied to Jerry Hill with car 207, I'm going to have to do a little more in-depth examination of his alibi for the time that the car was seen by Early and Roberts. This is a statement, a Dallas police document, a statement from J.M. Valentine, Jimmy Valentine. I was working the 2nd Platoon on November 22, 1963, and was driving police car number 207. I was in the Juvenile Bureau when I was informed of the shooting of the President Kennedy. I left immediately and went to the building where the president was shot. I helped search this building for quite a length of time and turned my keys over to Sergeant J.M. Putnam. I never did drive to Oak Cliff. Interesting that he leaves Jerry Hill out of his story here, but we've seen the Jerry Hill story where he said that he told Valentine that the president had been shot, and of course that he and Ewell got a ride in car 207 to the Texas School Book Depository. But Valentine leaves that out. The two inserts here are from a film taken in Oak Cliff at a time when Jim Valentine claimed that he was at the Texas School Book Depository. I think the police officer you can see in my inserts here is probably Valentine. The other person there is Sergeant Jerry Hill, the guy not wearing a jacket and with the bald spot on his head. That's Jerry Hill. I think this is Valentine and Hill in Oak Cliff at the time that Valentine claims he was at the Texas School Book Depository. And, of course, the larger picture shows Valentine at the Texas School Book Depository. Now, I got this picture at the UTA Library's digital gallery, and very interestingly, I think it says date created 1963, November 26, which is 4 days after the assassination. For some reason, this picture is said to have been created 4 days after the assassination, and if that's true, then it couldn't show Jimmy Valentine at the Texas School Book Depository on the day of the assassination. And it says here that this is from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram collection. So apparently this photograph was taken by a Fort Worth Star-Telegram photographer and somehow created 4 days after the assassination. I think this date of creation is correct, and this photograph was created after the assassination, that is, after November 22nd, in order to provide proof of an alibi for Jimmy Valentine, that is, to prove that he was at the Texas School Book Depository on the afternoon of the 22nd, when really he wasn't, and that this photograph was not taken on the day of the assassination, but it was created afterwards, as it says here, 4 days later, in order to provide Jimmy Valentine with an alibi. There also exist two other photographs of Jimmy Valentine at the Texas School Book Depository, standing in the same spot, from a different newspaper, the Dallas Times-Herald. And these are they. The Sixth Floor Museum has them, and the Sixth Floor Museum also has a negative strip, presumably the original, which includes these two photographs. And if we put all of these photographs together in the same frame here, we can see, I think, pretty clearly that the light coming from the windows looks very different in the Dallas Times-Herald photographs than it does in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram photograph. It's more natural looking in the Dallas Times-Herald. That is, the light is providing the illumination for the photography, and that makes Jimmy Valentine look a little hazier and less lit up, whereas the Fort Worth Star-Telegram photograph, Jimmy Valentine is being illuminated by a light source near the camera, as if there's a flash unit there providing the light. And so the light at the windows looks very different. And here, as I've circled in red, you can see the reflection of the light source in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram photograph. The light shining off the sign there, the no smoking sign, cannot possibly be coming from the windows. That has to be coming from a light source near the camera, the presumed flash unit. So the light for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram photograph is coming from the photographer, whereas in the Dallas Times-Herald, or the Allen photo as I have it labeled here, the name of the photographer, the light source is coming from the window. And I think it's very unlikely that a news photographer would have a flash unit with him on the day of the assassination, because he wouldn't have been prepared to take photographs indoors. He would have been prepared to take outdoor photography, because that's the event, an outdoor event. So the fact that the light source was provided by the photographer implies that this photograph was not taken on the day of the assassination, that it was a special thing to take this photograph, and that the photographer knew it was going to be an indoor photograph. And if we look at the edge of the pole here, where it comes in the two-dimensional image right next to the window, we can see that somehow the window has taken a chunk out of the pole. And that's very strange. That shouldn't happen. And here I've added little blue circles to all the corners where the light is in the photograph, where there's this darker little triangle in the corner. Now, this is not the corner of the windows. This is the corner of where the light is in the photograph. And what that means is these little corners are part of some kind of masking that was used to alter the photograph. And here I've circled just one of these corners where the light comes to the edge of the sign here. And I've done this to emphasize that this is not the corners of the windows. This is the corners of where the light is in the windows. And if you notice, going back to the blue circles here, notice that the light appears only in the right-hand lower corner and the upper left-hand corner of where the light is. In all the upper left-hand corners and the upper right-hand corners, or I should say in all the lower right-hand corners and the upper left-hand corners, we have these triangles. And that means that somebody in the darkroom is using some kind of masking to put light into the windows. And if they're putting light into the windows, that probably means originally there was no light coming in the windows. And what that means probably is that this photograph was taken at night, and it was altered in the darkroom to make it look as though it had been taken during the daytime. And I just want to illustrate this a little more with the sign here on the no smoking sign. We can see that the corner of the sign that I have circled here has actually been clipped off by a sloppy editor putting light in the windows. He masked his light so that it would overlap the sign, just as he did on the pole that I showed earlier, and you can see in this photograph here too. And I made this graphic to demonstrate that that sign did not actually have that corner cut off in real life. The insert in the lower right just happens to be a picture of that sign from the other side, and I've drawn a blue line on there based on being straight from the side where the bite is taken out of the sign. That bite really is taken out of the sign in real life. But I've got that blue line running straight across, and you can see that the level of the sign remains consistent all the way across to the right-hand edge that I have circled in red. And this demonstrates that the sign did not originally have that section overlapped by the light. It was originally in the sign. So if this had been an unaltered picture, we wouldn't see that chunk out of the sign by the window. That chunk out of the sign by the window was caused by an editor putting light into the windows in the darkroom. So this is a badly faked photograph. Even a non-photographer can see that. And therefore, I think the cover-up crew probably early on recognized that this wasn't good enough to prove that Jimmy Valentine had been at the Texas School Book Depository on the afternoon of November 22nd. So I think they decided that they needed more photography, and they persuaded William Allen somehow. Whether Allen was knowingly cooperating in a cover-up or not, I don't know. But they persuaded him somehow to take more photographs of Jimmy Valentine standing there. And with Lieutenant Day, we could see in the negative strip here that the two photographs on the left that precede the photographs of Jimmy Valentine are of Lieutenant Day. So I think somehow it was arranged to have Lieutenant Day there, because Lieutenant Day was there on the afternoon of the assassination. And so we can see on the supposed original roll of film that there are photographs of Lieutenant Day there, as he should be there. And then there are photographs of Jimmy Valentine, and this would seemingly prove that Jimmy Valentine was there on the day of the assassination. And it can be determined from various documents that Lieutenant Day was in the Texas School Book Depository from a little after 1 p.m. until 2 p.m. Then he left and went back to downtown, and then he came back again at 2:45 and stayed there until 7 p.m. So if you want to believe that Jimmy Valentine was at the Texas School Book Depository on the afternoon of the assassination, that is, that he was inside the building on the 6th floor, this photography allows you to believe that, but I think this photography was taken on some subsequent day, and Lieutenant Day would have reason to be there. I don't know, I can't prove that he was there subsequent to the day of the assassination, but it would not be an unusual thing for the crime scene inspector or investigators to go there the next day or the day after or whatever. And so I think they just had Jimmy Valentine go there on a subsequent day when Lieutenant Day was there, and they had Allen take some more pictures. And it seemingly proves that Jimmy Valentine was there on the day of the assassination. But I think that's a lie, because there would be no reason to fake the Fort Worth Star-Telegram photograph unless my explanation is correct. That is, my explanation explains all three photographs, not just the two that you would comfortably put Valentine there, if that's what you want. But he wasn't there. All of this photography is misrepresenting the reality, because Jimmy Valentine drove car 207 to Oak Cliff that afternoon. He did not stand guard on the 6th floor. So we have film of Jerry Hill arriving in car 207 at the Texas School Book Depository. And we have another film from a different angle showing the same thing with car 207 there. We can see that car 207, after letting those two people out, keeps driving down the street. And we don't get to see where car 207 parks. And we also have film of Jerry at the Texas School Book Depository outside of the building. Here he is walking north on the east side of the building. I don't know where he's going or what he's doing here. And then we have this film of him outside of the building once again, very closely cropped. There's no way to tell what time this really is. But apparently he's talking to reporters here and pointing up towards the building. Presumably he's pointing up to the sniper's nest window on the 6th floor. And presumably this would be after he had been in the building and had been up to the sniper's nest. And he's giving his story to reporters here about that, presumably. We get some very good coverage here of Jerry Hill, as if he's in charge of everything, and as if perhaps he has arranged to have photographers to take photography of him to make him look important, and also to prove that he's at the Texas School Book Depository. And then we have some still photography of Jerry Hill in a 6th floor window. This is not the sniper's nest window. This is the window to the west of the sniper's nest window. We have some photography of him apparently reporting from the window, from the sixth floor, that they found the sniper's nest, apparently. In his Warren Commission testimony, Sergeant Hill claimed to have spoken with all of these people at the Texas School Book Depository, and yet none of these people ever mentioned ever having seen Jerry Hill at the Texas School Book Depository. Of course, none of them were ever asked whether Hill was there or not, but we have no corroboration from any of these people that Gerald Hill's story about being at the Texas School Book Depository is true. In fact, the only person who ever claimed to have seen Jerry Hill at the Texas School Book Depository was this person. This is Steve Pieringer, as he appears in a Willis photo. He was a news photographer, and he claimed to have seen Jerry Hill in the window yelling down about the sniper's nest. And I find it intriguing that Pieringer apparently looks an awful lot like Jerry Hill, even dressed the same way. Got the same kind of build, wearing the same kind of hat. Of course, everybody wore suits. But it suggests the possibility that because there seems to be this symbiotic relationship, maybe that's not the right word, not symbiotic, I don't know what. But Pieringer is special to Hill because Pieringer is the only one that confirms that Hill was up in the window talking about the sniper's nest. I think it's interesting that they look together and perhaps suggest the possibility that Pieringer was to look like Jerry Hill and perhaps appear to possibly be Jerry Hill in the photography. Assuming the photography is not close up, you could certainly mistake one for the other. And this is the source document for the Pieringer corroboration of Jerry Hill being in the window. It's a radio report by a Joe Scott in which Pieringer appears. And I probably got this from the David Von Pine YouTube channel.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt CBS momentarily for a local bulletin with Joe Scott.
Thank you. We're down here at the scene of the current manhunt. There must be over 24 squad cars blocking the intersection of Elm and Houston Street. Steve Pieringer just returned from the building where they think they have this man surrounded, or where he shot from, and they found 4 shells on the... What floor was it on, Steve? Joe, Jerry Hill with the Dallas Police Department just leaned out a window there. It looked to me like he was on the 4th floor and told police to call the Dallas Crime Laboratory to the scene. Apparently they found some shells there in that room here in the Texas School Book Depository building at Elm and Field Street. So other police officers currently have the scene surrounded, while still more with shotguns are searching out the building at this time. But there have been some shells found, I believe, on the 4th floor in the police crime lab, currently en route to the scene as the search continues.
And that's the only non-photographic corroboration of Jerry Hill being inside the building on the day of the assassination. It comes from Steve Pieringer. Now, he said he thought it was on the 4th floor, when actually it was the 6th floor. And Pieringer also says the location of the building is Elm and Field Street, when it's at Elm and Houston. I don't know if either of those is significant, but I'm of the opinion Jerry Hill was never in the building, was never in a window, and that Pieringer is lying here, so it might be significant that Pieringer doesn't know what floor it was. And Pieringer died less than 5 years after the assassination, at the age of 27. And the official story here, Pieringer was burned over most of his body when a 5,000-gallon gasoline storage tank exploded during a fire at Kennedale, Texas, service station on August 1st, 1968. Pieringer died the following day in the hospital. He had been filming the fire scene from less than 50 yards away when the explosion sent a ball of flames 125 feet into the air, witnesses said. Nothing to see here, happens every day. And coincidentally, Joe Scott, the reporter in this radio report, also died an early death at age 33 on May 7th, 1965, just less than 2 years after the assassination. And the official story says Joe Scott tragically died at just 33 years of age after a brief illness in 1965. So, the two people involved with this radio report, the only non-photographic corroboration of Jerry Hill being in a window yelling about the sniper's nest, both of them died by 1968 and therefore, of course, could not be later questioned about their having witnessed or about Pieringer having witnessed Jerry Hill in a window of the Texas School Book Depository. Unfortunate. Terribly unfortunate. Now it is an undisputed fact that Deputy Luke Mooney is the first officer to find the sniper's nest, not Jerry Hill. And this is from Mooney's Warren Commission testimony. At the time he's starting here, he's on the 7th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. At that time, some news reporter or press, I don't know who he was climbing up with a camera. Of course, he wasn't taking any pictures. He was just looking too, I assume. So I went back down ahead of Officers Vickery and Webster. They came in behind me down to the 6th floor. I went straight across to the southeast corner of the building, and I saw all these high boxes. Of course, they were stacked all the way around over there, and I squeezed between two. And the minute I squeezed between these two stacks of boxes, I had to turn myself sideways to get in there. That is when I saw the expended shells and the boxes that were stacked up to look to be a rest for the weapon. And also there was a slight crease in the top box. Whether the recoil had made the crease or it was placed there before the shots were fired, I don't know. But anyway, there was a very slight crease in the box where the rifle could have lain, at the same angle that the shots were fired from. So at that time, I didn't lay my hands on anything because I wanted to save energy. I wanted to save every evidence we could for the fingerprints. So I leaned out the window, the same window from which the shots were fired, looked down, and I saw Sheriff Bill Decker and Captain Will Fritz standing right on the ground. Well, so I hollered, or signaled I hollered. I more or less hollered. I whistled a time or two before I got anybody to see me. And yet they was all looking up that way, too, except the sheriff. They wasn't looking up. And I told him to get the crime lab officers en route, that I had the location spotted. So I stood guard to see that no one disturbed anything until Captain Will Fritz approached with his group of officers, city officers. At that time, of course, when I hollered, of course, Officers Vickery and Webster, they came across, and later on several other deputies, I believe, Officers McCurley, A.D. McCurley, I believe he came over. So notice here that Mooney, who everybody agrees found the sniper's nest, says that he did what Jerry Hill says he did. That is, Mooney leaned out the window and yelled down to Captain Fritz to get the crime lab down there. And Mooney doesn't mention Gerald Hill being there. He mentions specifically other deputies, but it seems to me that if Hill had been with Mooney, that Mooney would have to say so, and he doesn't say so. And this is what Gerald Hill told the Warren Commission. Again, he's starting on the 7th floor, and these two deputies and I went down to 6th. I started to the right side of the building. We hadn't been there but a minute until someone yelled, "Here it is," or words to that effect. I moved over and found they had found an area where the boxes had been stacked in a sort of triangle shape with 3 sides over near the window. 2 small boxes with roller books on the side of the carton were stacked near the east side of the window. Then on the floor, near the baseboard or against the baseboard of the south wall of the building in front of the second window, in front of the, well, we would have to say second window from the east corner, there were 3 spent shells. At this point, I asked the deputy sheriff to guard the scene, not to let anybody touch anything. And I went over still further west to another window about the middle of the building on the south side, and yelled down to the street for them to send us the crime lab. Not knowing or not getting any indication from the street that they heard me, I asked the deputies again to stand guard the scene, or to guard the scene, and I would go down and make sure that the crime lab was en route. So here, it seems to me that Sergeant Hill has inserted himself into a pre-existing story. The Deputy Mooney describes things pretty much exactly the same as Sergeant Hill, except Sergeant Hill is not in Deputy Mooney's story. But Hill puts Mooney, without naming him, he puts the deputy into his story. So it looks to me as if Hill has inserted himself into the story here, implication being that he wasn't really there. And nobody ever asked Mooney if Hill was really there, but Mooney tells the story without Hill. And everybody accepts that Mooney was there, that he was the person who actually found the sniper's nest. So there is no testimony, and no witness testimony to support Jerry Hill's assertion that he went into the building and that he was present when the sniper's nest was found. He was present on the 6th floor, and that he stuck his head out this other window here and yelled down to Captain Fritz and Sheriff Decker to get the crime lab up there. It's just Hill and the photography who say this. The indications are from the other witness testimony that Hill was not there, though they were never directly asked that question. Nobody saw Hill inside the building, except, of course, Steve Pieringer, and I've already dealt with that. I think that's a very questionable witnessing by Steve Pieringer, and of course, he could never be asked about it because he died at the age of 27, according to the official story. So, while it's easy to accept that Sergeant Gerald Hill was lying to give himself an alibi for not being in car 207 in Oak Cliff, it's easy enough to accept that he's a liar, but it's a little harder to accept that this photography is misrepresenting the facts. So that's what I have to deal with here. And it's not just this photograph. There's also this one, and this one too. All 3 of them show a person, presumably Gerald Hill, and in 2 of them you can see that it is Gerald Hill in that particular window in the Texas School Book Depository. So I have to explain to you why you should not believe these 3 photographs. And I'm going to start with this one. This one is key because this one actually was taken on the day of the assassination and can be demonstrated to be an altered photograph. And this is a zoomed and cropped version of that photograph, showing the windows of interest here. The one Gerald Hill is allegedly in on the left, and on the far right, the supposed sniper's nest shooting window. This photo was taken by Arch Kimbrough. He was the president of his own construction business, doing business as Trinity Road and Bridge Company I have read that he was very successful in this endeavor, so he was a wealthy construction man in Dallas at the time, and on the day of the assassination, at the time of the assassination, he was nearby at a cafe. He heard a report of the assassination and ran to the scene, and he took, or we have anyway, 9 photographs that he took. And I'll be using these in this video. Sergeant Jerry Hill cannot be identified in this photo. We only assume it's Hill because we are told that he shouted out this window after the sniper's nest was found, and because we can identify him in those other 2 photos, as I said. But in this photo, we can't see that it's Jerry Hill. In fact, to me, it looks like probably something, looks like a circle with a dot in the middle has been added to this photo to obscure who this really is. I can't be sure that that's the case because the resolution of the photo isn't good enough to make that judgment. But I don't think this is Gerald Hill. I think this is actually Deputy Mooney that we see here. And while we don't have a blow-by-blow description by Kimbrough of his taking of these photographs, it seems to me that being aware of the Mooney story of hollering out the window, that probably Kimbrough heard Mooney hollering and took this first photo here and then continued to move in front of the building as he took these other 2 photos, and that Mooney's hollering probably alerted Kimbrough to the fact that he ought to photograph these windows. And if I'm right, that is that Mooney's hollering cued Kimbrough to, or prompted Kimbrough to take these photos, then Mooney should be in the sniper's nest window when Kimbrough takes these photos. Now here in the first photo, which I deem to be the first one Kimbrough took in when Mooney started hollering, I've got the sniper's nest window circled there, and you can't see it entirely, and it could be that Mooney is in the window here and we just can't see him. In what I deem to be the second photo taken while Mooney was hollering, we get a full view of the sniper's nest window, and we still can't see Mooney there. All we can see, apparently, is some boxes. And here I have circled in red the window that Jerry Hill supposedly will be hollering out of, and it has not yet been opened. So if Kimbrough is responding to hollering, he's responding to Mooney's hollering and from the sniper's nest window. So I think it's kind of weird that we can't see Mooney in the sniper's nest window. And in the third photo here, we can see what is apparently is Gerald Hill in the other window, but in the sniper's nest window, we still can't see Mooney. And this is kind of weird, I think. If Mooney's hollering alerted Kimbrough to take these photos, as seems to be pretty clear to me that that happened, then we should be able to see Mooney in the window hollering when Kimbrough turns his camera up there, but we don't. And this is a close-up of the second photo in the sequence that Kimbrough took that shows the full view of the sniper's nest window. And in my interpretation of things, we should be able to see the Deputy Mooney in the window here, trying to get the attention of Captain Fritz and Sheriff Decker. But we don't see Mooney there. What we see are boxes. And what I have here are close-ups of the sniper's nest window from the second and third photos, so we can compare how the window looks from one photo to the next. And here I have circled the boxes in each picture, and some people will look at photo comparisons like this and think that the boxes have been moved physically in the building. Usually that can be explained away as a different camera angle, and indeed here the camera angle does change, and you might be able to explain the positioning of the boxes that way as a different camera angle. However, here we have something very different from most of those comparisons. And here I have circled in the second photo of the sequence, the photo on the right here, the top of that top box. And it is clear, even in this poor resolution photograph, that the top of that box is between the camera and the bottom of that bottom window frame. And what that means is that box, or at least a portion of that box, is outside of the window frame. And here I have also circled that what must be that same box in the third photo of the sequence, where the position seems to have changed because of the camera angle. However, if the box is actually in that position, it cannot possibly be outside of the bottom window frame. So here we have a contradiction where the box must be in a position in the right here that it cannot be in on the left here, and yet it's the same box. So how is that possible? This is only possible if that second photo, the one on the right here, is an altered image. That box cannot possibly be out beyond the window frame if the third image, the one on the left, is a true image in that regard, and I think it is, and all the other photographs taken of the building after the assassination show that box to not be outside of the window frame. So this is an altered photograph. But why would they alter this photograph? It doesn't show anybody there, and that's the reason it was altered, to make it not show somebody there. And that somebody, of course, is Deputy Sheriff Mooney. This photograph was altered to hide the fact that Mooney was doing what everybody says he did, that is, hollering out the window. But it's hidden in this photograph for some reason. And the reason it was altered to hide Deputy Mooney was because Deputy Mooney was cut and pasted from this altered photograph, the one on the right here, and put into the third photograph. He was put into that photograph into Gerald Hill's window to make it seem as though Gerald Hill was there. And if you look at what I've circled in red in the third photo, you can see that Mooney is visible in that photo, because you can see that white spot on his chest. It's the same white spot on the chest in Gerald Hill's window. The guy that's supposed to be Gerald Hill is actually Mooney, taken out of the altered photograph. So in this third photograph, Mooney is actually in both windows, but he has been altered to make him look more like Gerald Hill in the Gerald Hill window, and we can only see him because of that white spot on his chest in the sniper's nest window. And this is an enlargement from the third Kimbrough photo showing who is supposed to be Gerald Hill in the window, who I say is actually Deputy Mooney. And as I alluded to earlier, I think this image has been altered by that circular sort of spot on his head with a dot in the middle. And here I've got the Kimbrough image side by side with one of those other photographs. And remember, in those other photographs, the black and white ones, I say that really is Jerry Hill in the window, even though I say it's Deputy Mooney in the color photograph here, the Kimbrough photo. And here I have added an enlargement of the window areas so that we can compare these two figures more easily. And my judgment is that the circular spot was added to make Deputy Mooney's head look more like Jerry Hill's head, and that actually Deputy Mooney is wearing his hat in the photo on the right, the Kimbrough photo, but that it has been altered to make it look as though he's not wearing a hat and that he has a bald pate like Jerry Hill has. So I'm saying that Deputy Mooney was cut from the second Kimbrough photo I've shown here and pasted into the third Kimbrough photo here, and then his head was altered to make him look consistent with Jerry Hill. And that's why in the altered photograph the box was made to go higher and appear to be outside of the window, because Mooney's head went a little higher than the boxes in the background, and so the photo editor added a little to the top of the boxes to hide the top of Mooney's head. And they had to hide him here because they took the image out of there to use it in the other Kimbrough photo to make it into Jerry Hill. And here I have an enlargement from the Kimbrough photo that allegedly shows Jerry Hill. Person I say is Luke Mooney, Deputy Mooney. And the little insert there, the circular insert, is a photograph of Mooney on the day of the assassination wearing his hat. So I'm saying this is the same person here, and that the Kimbrough photo has been altered to make it look like Jerry Hill. And here I've circled the alteration spot in red, and in green I've circled what remains of Deputy Mooney's hat in the Kimbrough photo. That is, instead of trying to remove his hat completely, all they did was put this spot over part of his hat so that it would match Jerry Hill. And here I've added Jerry Hill from one of those other photographs so that you can see the situation better, I think. The original from the Kimbrough photo has Deputy Mooney in the window wearing his hat, and the spot was put over his hat to make it look like somebody not wearing a hat who would be consistent with Gerald Hill. And that's how they altered the Kimbrough photo. They cut and pasted him from another Kimbrough photo. They cut and pasted Mooney from another Kimbrough photo. They altered Mooney to make it look like Gerald Hill. And the alteration to the head to make it not look like Mooney and look like Hill necessitated Jerry Hill being photographed with his hat in his hand, and that necessitated adding that alteration to the Kimbrough photo too, to make it seem as though Hill in the Kimbrough photo matches the other photos and is holding his hat, when Mooney had been wearing his hat when he hollered out the window. So the Kimbrough photography is actual photography from the day of the assassination, which has been altered to support Gerald Hill's alibi for being in car 207 and being in Oak Cliff at the time of the discovery of the sniper's nest. So my argument is that the Kimbrough photography was actually taken on the day of the assassination and was altered, but that these other two photographs of Gerald Hill in the window were not taken on the day of the assassination and were not altered. That is, they were taken sometime after the assassination, some days after the assassination, I don't know exactly when, but that they are photographs of Jerry Hill in the building on a different day. And the first point I'll make regarding these two photographs is that there is no way to demonstrate that they were taken on the day of the assassination unless you want to use a circular argument involving Jerry Hill being in the window, because you can't see anything else that would make this photograph unique to the day of the assassination. In this photo, All we can see is the window that Jerry Hill is in, and Jerry Hill is there, but you can't see anything else. You can't see anything on the street level, and you can't see the other windows. So you can't, Jerry Hill aside, you can't say this photo was taken on the day of the assassination. So I think that's one reason to believe, and the entirety of the evidence supports it, that this photograph was not taken on the day of the assassination. It was taken later in order to support Jerry Hill's alibi for the time of car 207 being in Oak Cliff. And similarly, the other photograph can't be confirmed to have been taken on the day of the assassination either. We can see some other windows, and they are open the way that they were on the day of the assassination, but we can't see any other people. So all this would have taken would be for having Jerry Hill or a friend of his on the day the photo was taken, put the windows in the correct configuration, open the couple windows that needed to be opened, if they weren't already open. And there's nothing, all it involves is a little preparation. And there was a lot of preparation for murdering the president, I can assure you, that they didn't want to get caught, so they were willing to do the preparation. And so you can't demonstrate that this photograph was taken on the day of the assassination unless you want to make the circular argument with Jerry Hill. This can't be proven to be taken on the day of the assassination either. The first of these photographs seems to be pretty clearly attributed to William Allen. The sixth floor museum has a negative contact sheet which shows this photograph on it and attributes it to Allen. And I think that's the best evidence we're going to get. William Allen just happens to be the same photographer who took those two pictures of Jimmy Valentine that I've already gone over. So probably this chicanery was done on the same day, that is on the same day that they photographed Jimmy Valentine standing on the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository. They also photographed Jerry Hill in the window, and this would be on a day subsequent to the assassination. If I'm right, that would mean that this negative strip would have to have been created after the fact. That is, these two photographs on here. Now, there's another photograph on here that's obviously taken the same day as the picture of Jerry Hill. I'll get to that later. But it doesn't show Jerry Hill. It's the other window. But if I'm right, that this was taken on a day subsequent to the assassination, this negative strip would have to have been recreated, because following these two pictures, there are photographs from the day of the assassination. So what I'm saying is that this negative strip also was faked to cover their tracks by putting in two photos taken after the day of the assassination with photos taken on the day of the assassination. This is not a difficult thing to do if you have the skills to do it, and this was a well-funded assassination of the President of the United States, so I'm sure they had the skills to do it. But the authorship of the second photo is not so well attested. Many assassination buffs will turn to Richard Trask when they have questions about the photography, because he wrote a book about it. And in his book he wrote this: many of the photos taken around the book depository were similar in content and shooting location to those being taken by Jim Murray. Both men took photos of cops toting shotguns on Houston Street, looking up at the building, and of Sergeant Hill motioning out of a sixth-floor window shortly before 1:05 p.m. when the shell casings were discovered. Now, this is a chapter about William Allen that he says this. So he's saying that he says many of the photos, well, he's not real clear here. He doesn't mention Kimbrough at all in this book. But anyway, what we have to conclude, I think, is that he's saying the photos we have of Jerry Hill, or at least some of the photos we have of Jerry Hill shouting out the window, were taken by William Allen and Jim Murray. We only have 2 other photos other than the Kimbrough, so I don't know what other photos he might be talking about. And in the Trask chapter on Jim Murray, the second photo does appear on the page. And also he says there, several photographers, including Jim Murray, took pictures of Hill as he leaned out of the window. And the caption of the photo says, Sergeant Hill leaning out a 6th-floor window, pointing to the corner window where the shell casings were found. Now, clearly the implication is that this photo was taken by Jim Murray, but he does not directly say that. He does not explicitly say that. He just puts the photo there. He does not attribute it to Jim Murray, but the implication, because it's on a chapter about Jim Murray, is that Jim Murray took this photo. And as far as I've been able to find, that's the only attribution to Jim Murray I've ever been able to find, and it's a very indirect attribution. So I'm questioning whether Jim Murray actually took this photo or not. There are 2 similar photos adequately well attested to, or well attested to have been taken by Jim Murray. We have contact sheet that includes them. These were taken several minutes before anybody was doing any hollering from any windows, but they do show a similar orientation of the camera. That is, Jim Murray on these 2 photos turned his camera 90 degrees to take the picture, to include the length of the building or the height of the building. And in the picture of Hill that is kind of sort of attributed to him, the camera is held the same way, but I don't take that as proof that Jim Murray took the photo. So I don't think Jim Murray took this photo. I think probably it was taken by William Allen on the same day that he took this other photo of Jerry Hill in the window. And the idea was to make us think probably Jim Murray took it too. So I think we have William Allen, Jimmy Valentine, and Jerry Hill going to the Texas School Book Depository on a day subsequent to the assassination in order to fake photography to support the alibis of Jerry Hill and Jimmy Valentine, to support their assertion that they were not in car 207 when it went to Oak Cliff and was seen by Early and Roberts, and when other things were done there, no doubt. Another reason to think that these 2 photos of Jerry Hill were not taken on the same day of the assassination is Jerry Hill's necktie. In this graphic, the photo on the right is from a frame of a film showing Jerry Hill arriving at the Texas School Book Depository on the day of the assassination. There's no question that's the day of the assassination because you can see all the things happening around there. And the photo on the left is the William Allen photo of Jerry Hill in the window, the 6th-floor window. And we can see that the short end of the necktie, that is the piece that's underneath the front end of the necktie, is much shorter in the William Allen photo than it is in the photo of Jerry Hill arriving on the day of the assassination. Now, the official story says that Jerry Hill went into the building shortly after he arrived, and then shortly after that, he's hollering out the window. Well, I think it's very unlikely that during that time between him arriving and yelling out the window that he would have taken off his necktie and retied it. I think this demonstrates that the photograph by Allen was taken on a different day than the photograph of him arriving at the building, because the photograph of him in the window shows the necktie to be much shorter in that back piece than it is when he arrives. So it was taken a different day. He had taken the tie off by then, of course, and then put it back on again, and he tied it a little differently so that the back end was shorter than it was on the day of the assassination. And this demonstrates from another angle that the Allen photo was taken on a different day. So I have demonstrated here that the Kimbrough photo showing Hill in the window was altered, and that the other photos, the Allen photo and the possibly Murray or Allen photo, were both taken on a different day. So there is no credible witness account of Jerry Hill ever having gone into the building on the day of the assassination, and there is no credible photographic evidence that he went into the building on the day of the assassination or that he hollered out a window. So Jerry Hill has no alibi. We know he was riding in car 207. We know that car 207 was seen in Oak Cliff after Oswald walked into the rooming house. So I think it's a reasonable conclusion that Jerry Hill and Jim Valentine are driving Oswald from the Texas School Book Depository to the rooming house in Oak Cliff. And I think Jerry Hill's hollering alibi was planned in advance, and I'll go over why I think that here. It is very consistent in the photography that the window that Jerry Hill shouted out had been closed before Mooney hollered and was opened and left open after that. Here we have two photographs. One on the left is Murray. This was taken probably about 15 minutes after the assassination, something like that, 10 or 15 minutes after the shooting, well before the sniper's nest was found. And the window that Jerry Hill is photographed in at this time is closed. And afterwards, and this you can tell Lieutenant Day is in this photograph arriving at the building with his sidekick Studebaker. And this is after the sniper's nest was found and Lieutenant Day was called to investigate it. And the window you can see is open, the Jerry Hill window. And this is consistent in all of the photography. So it's pretty clear that on the day of the assassination, that window was indeed opened after the discovery of the sniper's nest. And we can see this in the Kimbrough photography too, a photograph taken before, it's probably during Mooney's hollering, shows the Hill window to be closed, and then, of course, after Mooney hollers, the window is open, and Jerry Hill has been inserted, or, as I say, Luke Mooney has been inserted there and altered to look like Jerry Hill. So what I think this means is that it was planned that for when the sniper's nest was discovered, and I don't think it was planned for Mooney specifically to find it, but I think somebody was ready to open that window at the discovery of the sniper's nest. And they knew that they were going to be faking a photograph afterwards. And so they wanted the window to be open so it could be proven, supposedly, that Jerry Hill opened the window. As the photography implies, the fake photography taken on a different day implies that he opened it. But I think somebody else was there to open that window so that could be consistent with Jerry having been in the window. Of course, if you want to argue that Jerry really was in the window on the day of the assassination, you could say that proves it. The fact that window was opened on the day of the assassination. But I think I've adequately demonstrated that that photography does not represent the reality. That is, Jerry Hill was not in the window on the day of the assassination. And so, therefore, that means somebody else opened it and didn't stick his head out, just opened it. And that implies that this whole alibi was planned in advance, that they knew they were going to photograph Hill subsequent to the assassination and pretend or imply that Jerry Hill must have opened the window that really was opened. Now, getting back to the William Allen contact sheet in the custody of the 6th Floor Museum, this has two photographs on it, which I say were taken on some day subsequent to the assassination and were put into a film strip with pictures taken on the day of the assassination. And I've already dealt with this. One of them is the Hill photo, Hill in the window photo. And the other one is the photo that immediately follows that, a photo of the sniper's nest window. And this is the photo from that negative. Now, I think it's obvious that this photo and the Hill window photo were taken on the same day, one after the other. And so here I've put them together as if they were taken at the same time as one photo. Of course, they are not taken at exactly the same time, but I think they were taken one immediately after the other. So that's what I've done here, to put them together as if they are simultaneous. And here I've zoomed a little and cropped just so I can use the resolution to its maximum effect on this format that I'm making the video in. And if you study it, you can see that very faintly there is somebody visible in the sniper's nest window. And here I've highlighted that face in the window by increasing the brightness. And also I've inserted a photograph of Luke Mooney. And I think maybe that's Luke Mooney in the sniper's nest window looking at Jerry Hill and posing, standing there. And as I say, this is on a day subsequent to the assassination. So I think that Luke Mooney was enlisted for the faking of the Jerry Hill photograph. And they took this second photograph of the sniper's nest window just so it could be demonstrated upon study of the photo that Luke Mooney was there while Jerry Hill was hollering, and that would apparently prove the official story to be true, even though, as I've already covered here, Jerry Hill does not appear in Luke Mooney's story. And if we compare my reconstruction of the William Allen photos, the black and white on top, which I say was taken on a day after the assassination, with the Kimbrough photo, we can see some issues here. You might think, if you're a shill or an idiot, you might think this supports your position because it superficially looks consistent in that we have apparently Mooney in both photos standing in the sniper's nest window and apparently Hill in both photos in this other window. But if you think about it, something the shills and idiots are not inclined to do, you can see that this does not match up very well, actually. Circled in green is Luke Mooney, presumably, in both photos. And I've gone over in the Kimbrough photo. It's that white spot on Luke Mooney's chest, which also is on Gerald Hill's chest in the Kimbrough photo, but not in the other one. If you look at this, it looks like Luke Mooney is probably standing up in the Kimbrough photo. And yet, in the Allen photo, we can see his head there right by the window. Now, these windows are a little deceptive from the outside. These windows are actually very close to the floor inside the building. So Luke Mooney's face would not be visible there if he were standing up and in the Allen photo. But they put his face there so that we would see it and know, supposedly, that this was the day of the assassination, when actually this was taken after the assassination. I don't know if Luke Mooney is on his knees there or if he was photographically inserted into the window in the Allen photo. But anyway, it's not consistent with the Kimbrough photo, because with the Kimbrough photo, Luke Mooney is either standing up or he might be on his knees there, but his head would be much higher. So it's not consistent there. As I circled in blue, these boxes, even though you have different camera angles, sometimes you can't see boxes from different camera angles, these boxes are high enough in the Kimbrough photo that if they were still there in the Allen photo, you would see them in the windows. And they're not in the windows in the Allen photo. And you can't even blame the windows for reflecting the light in such a way that you couldn't see them, because it should be visible in the edge of the sniper's nest window that's partially open. and you can't see it there either. And as I've circled in yellow, similarly, there are boxes over on the over in the hill companion window there that should be visible in both photos. You could see a little corner of a box in the upper photo, the William Allen photo, the black and white, but on the Kimbrough photo, there's a pile of boxes that stacks up higher that should be visible in the Allen photo if it were taken on the day of the assassination, which it was not. So, sorry, shills and idiots, but this does not prove your case. It proves my case. That is that the Allen photos were taken on a different day. So this was a very sophisticated photographic falsification of the evidence. But mistakes were made. So the point of putting Jerry into the window is to prove that he was at the Texas School Book Depository until after the discovery of the sniper's nest. So it is key to Jerry's alibi to have the timing of the sniper's nest such that it proves that he was there until after the shooting on 10th Street, because that proves he had nothing to do with what happened in Oak Cliff until after the shooting on 10th Street. And to do this, they had to move the time forward or make the discovery time later than it actually was. My analysis shows that the actual time of discovery was around 1250 or maybe 1248. That what I'm calling the Mooney time here is something that the evidence pins down to 1258, the evidence of the police radio recording. And then I have what I call the Fritz time, which seems to be the official story time. It's when Captain Fritz and his detectives directly under him said that the discovery occurred at 1:15, and I think they actually restaged the discovery in order to make the time 1:15. And the point is, because Tippit supposedly was shot on 10th Street at 1:15, they want to make sure Jerry Hill is photographed at the Texas School Book Depository after 1:15, so it cannot be said that Jerry Hill had anything to do with the shooting on 10th Street. So I have to go through the discovery times here now. And the 1258 time I'm calling the Mooney time because these 3 points of evidence confirm the Mooney time. Or I should say Mooney presents a time and the other 2 points of evidence confirm that time. In his Warren Commission testimony, Mr. Ball asked Mooney, about what time of day was this? And he's talking about the discovery of the sniper's nest. And Mooney says, well, it was approaching 1 o'clock. It could have been 1 o'clock. Did you look at your watch? No, sir, I didn't. I should have, but I didn't look at my watch at the time to see what time it was. And then on the Dallas police radio recording, at about 12:58, we have 260, who is Sergeant Harkness, calling in to ask for the crime lab to come to the Texas School Book Depository. This was done immediately after Mooney hollered out the window that he found the sniper's nest. The testimony is that then the crime lab was called. And on the radio, we can determine that in the 12:58 minute, the crime lab was called. So that puts the time 12:58 on the Mooney time. And then Lieutenant Day, who is the big cheese in the crime lab, in his Warren Commission testimony, said, shortly before 1 o'clock, I received a call from the police dispatcher to go to 411 Elm Street, Dallas. Is there any particular building at that particular location? The Texas School Book Depository, I believe, is the correct name on it. Did you go there? Yes, sir. I went out of my office almost straight up at 1 o'clock. I arrived at the location on Elm about 1:12. So these 3 pieces of evidence seem to pretty solidly place the time of discovery at 12:58 or maybe a minute before that, but I'm calling it 12:58. But then there's the Captain Fritz time of 1:15, 17 minutes later. And this is a document that comes from Fritz Papers. I guess it was his personal papers, I don't know, but it is an official document in which the time is given at 1:15. Hauls found by Mooney of Sheriff's Office showed Captain Fritz where they were. Now you could argue, and I have kind of half blocked out there 1:18 J.D. Tippett shooting reported, because that's nothing to do with what I'm talking about here. So at 1:15, you could argue that this is when Captain Fritz was actually shown the halls, but this is 17 minutes later. I doubt very much that it took Captain Fritz 17 minutes to get from street level to the 6th floor and see the sniper's nest. That's quite a long time, even for Captain Fritz to get up there. So I view this as a significant difference in time for something like this. And then we have the Sims and Boyd report saying the same thing. Empty hulls were found about 1:15. I don't credit this very much because I view Sims and Boyd to be under the direct control of Captain Fritz. I think they would say anything that Captain Fritz wanted them to say. I don't need to go over the evidence why I think that in this video. I've covered that before, and I don't remember it right now. But anyway, what we have here is this new time, 1:15, being said by Fritz, Sims, and Boyd. I could easily dismiss this 1:15 time, except that B.L. Sankel, whom I deem to be an honest actor in this affair, even though he is a Homicide and Robbery Bureau detective under Captain Fritz, I still think, because of several things Sankel said in this matter, including what he said about Harry Weatherford, which is off topic, so I won't get into that. But I believe that Sankel is generally honest, and he says 1:15 too, so this makes this more of a problem for me. How can it's pretty clear 12:58 is the time supported by the radio traffic, and we have a timestamp on that. So how can all of these people be 17 minutes off? And my conclusion is that Fritz, Boyd, and Sims are lying, as they always are, but that Sankel actually witnessed a second discovery of the sniper's nest, which was staged in order to move the time to the time of the shooting on 10th Street in order to give Jerry Hill an alibi for the shooting on 10th Street. And I think my conclusion that the discovery time was reenacted is supported by the Warren Commission testimony of Clyde Haygood. Did you search the building on the 6th floor or not? Yes. Were you there when they found the rifle? Yes. Were you there when they found the shells? Yes. Where were you when the shells were found? I was on the 6th floor when the shells were found. I was still on the 6th floor when they found the rifle. On the 5th. On the 5th? 6th floor, rather. I am sorry. All right. Clyde Haygood, whom I deem to be relatively honest in this matter. I don't think he's directly controlled by Captain Fritz anyway. He also says that, well, he doesn't give the time. He says he was present when the shells were discovered, but he certainly wasn't. Clyde Haygood is a motorcycle officer, and if a motorcycle officer had been on the floor when Mooney discovered the shells, then Mooney would have said so, I think. And I don't think Clyde Haygood was present when Mooney discovered the shells. But as this photograph shows, Clyde Haygood is there when Captain Fritz is there with his men. Mooney's still there, but also Clyde Haygood was in the motorcade, and he reported witness reports on the radio, so we know he was busy for a little while before the sniper's nest was discovered. And so it's very unlikely he would have been there when Mooney discovered the shells. So my conclusion is that Haygood was there when Fritz discovered the shells, and Haygood thinks he was there when they were discovered. Therefore, I think probably Fritz and Sims and Boyd reenacted the discovery, and Haygood thought that he witnessed the discovery, or he was there when they were discovered, when he really wasn't. They had been discovered 17 minutes earlier. And that's why my honest boy Senkel also says that the discovery was at 1:15, because Fritz, Sims, and Boyd reenacted the discovery. And they did it to make the time of the discovery later, so that it would give Sergeant Hill an alibi for the time of the shooting in Oak Cliff. So of these two times, there's no question in my mind whatsoever that 12:58 is the better time, the more likely time, because it has the better evidence. And it's both Mooney and Lieutenant Day said it was before 1 o'clock, and we have the 12:58 radio transmission. So I think the Mooney time, as I'm calling it, the 12:58 time, trumps the Fritz time, the 1:15 time. And it demonstrates that the times were changed in order to improve Jerry Hill's alibi. But there's more to it than that. There's reason to think that even this 12:58 time was faked, that even 12:58 is several minutes later than the actual discovery time. And to investigate this possibility, we'll go to the police recording of Channel 1, where the call was made to call for the crime lab, allegedly by Sergeant Harkness.
260. Get a 508 down to the Texas School Book Depository. Simple.
And then 10 minutes later, the same person again calls in, allegedly Sergeant Harkness, on Channel 1 again, and says this.
260. And former squads and anyone that gets any information regarding this incident down here to bring it to 9 at Elm and Houston. Bring the person to 9 at Elm and Houston.
This is a completely unnecessary transmission. Everybody knows that Inspector Sawyer is in charge. He's 9, and he's at Elm and Houston. So this is an unnecessary transmission, but Sergeant Harkness, allegedly, makes this transmission anyway on Channel 1. And I think there are good reasons to believe that this is not actually Sergeant Harkness. For one, being part of the motorcade detail, Sergeant Harkness had been transmitting on Channel 2 since the firing of the shots. And these two transmissions come on Channel 1. It's not impossible that Harkness could have switched channels, but there's no reason to think that he would. And another reason is, I don't think it sounds like Sergeant Harkness. We have recordings of Sergeant Harkness, which we can compare.
I have a witness that said he come from the 5th floor of the Texas Depository Bookstore at Houston and Elm. I have him with me now. We're going to seal off the building.
This, like all the transmissions of Sergeant Harkness we have on recordings, is very noisy, of course. And so that makes it more difficult to do a voice comparison. But even considering the noise, and it's different on Channel 1, you don't get that noise on Channel 1, just on Channel 2 with the motorcycle transmissions. Even with that noise, to me it sounds like it's a different person. And this other Sergeant Harkness, the one on Channel 1, reporting at 12:58 and 1:08, he's kind of sassy, like he's some smart-ass kid impersonating Sergeant Harkness. So I don't think we have Sergeant Harkness at 12:58 and 1:08. I think that's somebody else pretending to be Sergeant Harkness.
260.
60.
Get a 508 down to Texas School Book Depository.
Simple.
I have a witness to say coming from the fifth floor of the Texas Depository Bookstore. Get a 508 down to Texas School Book Depository.
And I think the reason that Sergeant Harkness was impersonated on the radio here was to make it seem as though the sniper's nest had been found at 12:58 rather than the time it was really found at prior to this. And so they, to prove that, to put a timestamp on it, they have this fake Sergeant Harkness transmission at 12:58 in order to demonstrate that the sniper's nest was found at 12:58. And that gives Jerry, this is the original plan, I think. The original plan was to make it look as though Jerry Hill had been at the Texas School Book Depository until 1 o'clock, because the shooting on 10th Street was planned to occur earlier. They couldn't do that earlier because Oswald's bus got stuck in traffic. Oswald wasn't on the bus, but the idea was to explain Oswald's movements as having taken that bus to 10th Street. But because that bus didn't get to 10th Street until a later time, they had to change the time of the shooting on 10th Street, and that means they had to change the time of the discovery of the sniper's nest, because that's what Jerry Hill's alibi depends upon. But the first plan was to have the shooting on 10th Street go off at about 1 o'clock, and that's why we have this faked 12:58 time, but the actual discovery was earlier than 12:58. The last time that Sergeant Harkness appears in the Channel 2 transcripts we have is at 12:48. And I have to admit, this is too complex for me to even remember the details of it. But it's obvious to me that this transmission was screwed around with, that we don't have a recording of this, but we have different versions and transcripts. And it looks to me like in the recording that existed at one time, that part of the recording was recorded over, a later part of the recording was recorded over this part of the Harkness transmission in order to hide something on there. I think what they're hiding is the reporting of the sniper's nest. That is, I think the sniper's, or one of the things they're hiding. I think the sniper's nest report actually came at 12:48 from Sergeant Harkness, and that's the reason, or one of the reasons, why this has been all messed up here, and why we don't have a recording of it today, because it would probably be obvious that it was messed up if we could hear it. But anyway, this leads me to believe that Sergeant Harkness actually reported the sniper's nest discovery at 12:48. And this is from the Sergeant Harkness Warren Commission testimony, where he's being questioned about what he was doing at the Texas School Book Depository on the day of the assassination. And he says, "I went back to the front, and Inspector Sawyer helped to get the crowd back first, and then Inspector Sawyer assigned me to some freight cars that were leaving out of the yard, to go down and search all freight cars that were leaving the yard. Then what did you do? Well, we got a long freight that was in there, and we pulled some people off there and took them to the station." "You mean some transients?" "Tramps and hobos that were on the freight car?" "Yes, sir." "Then what did you do?" "That was all my assignment." So what this means is that Sergeant Harkness, who was very instrumental in the early minutes after the assassination in managing the scene at the Texas School Book Depository, according to radio communications, Sergeant Harkness was reassigned to go search freight cars, and that's all he did that day. That was his last assignment. So the way I see this is, at 12:48, because that's the last time he appears on Channel 2, he had been reassigned, or he was reassigned at that time, to go search the freight cars. And that's because somebody who was managing the assassination events and monitoring the radio, realized that Harkness was becoming a problem because he had called for the crime lab at 12:48, which is earlier than they wanted that call to be on the radio. They knew they were going to impersonate him to make the discovery of the sniper's nest look to be later. And so they reassigned him to search freight cars where he wouldn't be on the radio saying anything and where he wouldn't be able to hear the radio of him being impersonated. Even though they were impersonating him on Channel 1 and he was tuned to Channel 2, he might possibly have heard Channel 1 if he was at his motorcycle and he had switched over to the channel to see what's going on there. So they had him go search railroad cars, because then he wouldn't hear the radio, he wouldn't hear himself being impersonated and be able to object to it, and he wouldn't be saying any more, he wouldn't be making any more transmissions to mess up what their alterations, that is, their impersonation of him. So what I'm saying is that Sergeant Harkness reported the discovery of the sniper's nest at 12:48, and that was overdubbed on the recording with another part of the recording, and then we never get to hear that part of the recording that they overdubbed, but we get to see remnants of it in the transcripts. And then Harkness was reassigned to go search railroad cars just to get rid of him. And then Sergeant Harkness was impersonated on Channel 1 at 12:58 in order to make it look as though the sniper's nest had been discovered at 12:58, because the original plan was to give Jerry Hill an alibi until 1 o'clock, saying that Jerry Hill couldn't have been in Oak Cliff at the time of the shooting, which was originally planned for about 1 o'clock. And then, after the shooting had gone off later than planned, Captain Fritz decided to change the time of the discovery of the sniper's nest to 1:15, and he actually reenacted the discovery of the sniper's nest so that Detective Sankel and Clyde Haygood would think that the discovery was at 1:15, and that time would get into the record. So it could be argued that Gerald Hill was at the Texas School Book Depository until at least 1:15. Prior to my becoming aware of Sergeant Harkness's transmission having been screwed around with at 12:48, I had figured out here, based upon various pieces of evidence, and I'm not going to go through all the details here, but you could pause the video or do a screen capture here if you want, and you can see what I'm talking about, where I figured the timing of Luke Mooney's actions in the building, or from the time of the shots being fired. And, of course, this involves a lot of estimating. But I figured that Luke Mooney probably found the sniper's nest at 12:47. And so this coincides very well with a 12:48 time, or around 12:50. It seemed to me that based upon his actions as he described and based upon other events, that he must have found the sniper's nest well before 12:58, and I came up with 12:47, and this was in 2019 I did this. So I have no doubt in my mind that the sniper's nest was found before 12:58, around 12:50, or 12:48 even. So the testimony and the photography was manipulated in order to give Gerald Hill an alibi all the way to 1:15, an alibi for him having been in Oak Cliff. That is, in order to falsely prove that Gerald Hill was at the Texas School Book Depository at least until 1:15. And now we move along to Sergeant Gerald Hill's ride to Oak Cliff. In order to hide the fact that Jerry Hill actually went in car 207 to Oak Cliff, he lied and falsified the evidence about how he did get there, hear from his Warren Commission testimony. He's in his story, he's at the Texas School Book Depository when this starts. We were standing there with Inspector Sawyer, and Assistant District Attorney Bill Alexander came up to us, and we had been standing there for a minute when we heard the strange voice on the police radio say that something to the effect that an officer had been shot, and the voice on the radio said he thought he was dead. At this point, Sergeant Owen said something to the effect that this would have been one of his men. Captain Sawyer said, "Well, as much help as we have here, why don't you go with Sergeant Owens to Oak Cliff on that detail?" And Bill Alexander said, "Well, if it is all right, I will go with you." And the reporter Jim Ewell came up, and I said an officer had been shot in Oak Cliff, and he wanted to go with us also. So here, Jerry Hill is claiming that he rode to Oak Cliff in Sergeant Owens' car with Bill Alexander and Jim Ewell. And as I mentioned earlier, none of these people ever say anything about Sergeant Hill being at the Texas School Book Depository. And in his Warren Commission testimony, Sergeant Owens said, I told Inspector Sawyer that I was assigned to Oak Cliff and an officer was involved in the shooting and I was taking off. So I proceeded, I got in my car, and Captain Westbrook and Bill Alexander and Assistant District Attorney also was in the car with me, and we started out to, I think the call came out at 400 East 10th or 400 East Jefferson. So Owens doesn't mention Gerald Hill getting in the car with him. He's got Bill Alexander in the car with him. So it sounds like Jerry Hill inserted himself into the Owens story. And then Ewell was not questioned by the authorities, but in the Sneed book, the Larry Sneed book, Ewell said, "I left the location at the school book depository and jumped into a car driven by Captain Westbrook with Sergeant Stringer. I rode in the back seat as we sped across into Oak Cliff by taking the Houston Street Viaduct right beside the Dallas News." So Ewell says he went into a different car. He went with Captain Westbrook's car. So nobody backs up. We don't have anything from William Alexander. So nobody backs up Jerry's story. And in fact, what they say pretty much excludes Hill as being in either of their cars. But that's not all. In real time, on the day of the assassination, Jerry Hill faked the fact that he was riding in Sergeant Owens' car by getting on the radio and using Sergeant Owens' call number. And this is from his Warren Commission testimony, Hill's Warren Commission testimony. In the process of getting the location straight, and I think it was at this point, I was probably using 19 call number because I was riding with him. We got the information correctly that the shooting had actually been at East 10th, and we were en route there. So what he's saying is that because he's riding with Sergeant Owens in Sergeant Owens' car, Jerry was on the radio using Sergeant Owens' call number. And we can hear Jerry's voice on the radio recording we have of Channel 1, and I've circled in red here the 19 so that you can follow along if you want to. The 19 here, it says that's Sergeant Owens because 19 is the call number of Sergeant Owens. But according to Jerry, he's using Sergeant Owens' call number because he's riding in Sergeant Owens' car, not in car 207. And he actually goes on Channel 2. On the left here is Channel 1, on the right is Channel 2. And very weirdly, because nobody ever does this, you know, if they're out on a call, they don't go back and forth from Channel 1 to Channel 2. Jerry Hill gets on to Channel 2 and gets his voice recorded on there, too. And this is definitely Jerry Hill.
19. Give me the correct address on the shooting. 501 East 10th. 105. Was 519 East Jefferson correct? We have two locations, 501 East Jefferson and 501 East 10th. 19, are you en route? This is north and forward. 10. 19 is en route.
And we can be sure that that is Jerry Hill and not Sergeant Owens, because Sergeant Owens sounds very different on the radio, as this example demonstrates.
19, I'm at this location at Triple Underpass where you want me.
So this would seem to support Jerry Hill's story that he was riding with Sergeant Owens and using Sergeant Owens' call number, because we have a recording of him apparently doing that. Of course, the problem with that is he could be in any police car, even car 207, using the radio and saying the same things. And we actually have proof in the radio recording that Jerry Hill was not riding with Sergeant Owens, that Sergeant Owens was still at the Texas School Book Depository when Jerry Hill was on the radio. And I'm going to play all of this. Jerry Hill says 19 en route up there at the top. The first one I have red boxed. And down at the bottom here, the last one I have red boxed is Captain Talbert saying 19 will be en route shortly. It doesn't say shortly in the transcript, but it says shortly on the recording. So what this means is that Captain Talbert, who is at the Texas School Book Depository, is saying that Sergeant Owens is still at the Texas School Book Depository. He is not en route yet, but Jerry Hill was en route several transmissions prior. So this proves that Jerry Hill was not riding with Sergeant Owens, but that he was pretending to be riding with Sergeant Owens, and he was faking this in real time. He was probably in car 207 on the radio, pretending that he was riding with Sergeant Owens.
19 is en route.
10-4-19.
605 is code 5.
10-4-605, 119. 85. 85.
85.
Suspect running west on Jervis from the location.
Hello.
No physical description.
Hello. Right here on 10th Street, 500 block. This police officer just shot. I think he's dead.
10-4, we have the information. The citizen using radio remain off of their radio now.
Men 111 are clear, 2,000 kilometers.
10-4, remain in downtown area, 224, 111.
We're in one car, mine's over in East Dallas.
15.
15.
Channel 2. I'm using the three-wheelers motor. I'll have to go to another radio. 15, you received the information on the police officer shot.
10-4, but didn't that citizen say first he was on Jefferson, then on 10th, and then Chesapeake?
Yes.
Do they relate?
Yes, at Denver.
19 will be in Ross shortly.
10-4.
19 will be in Ross shortly.
10-4.
So Captain Talbert, 1 minute and 44 seconds after Jerry Hill said he was en route to Oak Cliff, says that Sergeant Owens is still at the Texas School Book Depository. This proves, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Jerry Hill, in real time, was pretending to be riding with Sergeant Owens to Oak Cliff when he really wasn't. And why would he do that? The only reason I can think of why he would do that is because he's in car 207. He's already in Oak Cliff, and he wants to create this alibi. This alibi is that he was at the Texas School Book Depository until after the shooting on 10th Street. So that means he had nothing to do with the shooting on 10th Street or anything that happened before that, because he was at the Texas School Book Depository. That's his story, but he wasn't really there. This is all an elaborate alibi created by Jerry Hill in real time, so that means he knew in advance that he was going to be creating this alibi.
19 will be in Ross shortly.
So my conclusion is that Sergeant Gerald Hill rode to Oak Cliff in Dallas Police Car number 207, and that this was part of a plan This was something that was worked out in advance, and I think the best explanation for it is that he and Jimmy Valentine gave Oswald a ride to the rooming house. And I surmise that Hill and Valentine picked up Oswald at the rooming house after Early and Roberts went back to banging on the television, and gave him a ride to the intersection of 10th and Marsalis. One reason I surmise this is because the evidence seems to indicate that the original plan had been to say that Oswald rode the bus to the intersection of 10th Street and Marsalis, and then went and shot Tippit. So I think that Hill and Valentine delivered Oswald to that intersection. And another reason I think that is because there is a witness who claims to have seen Oswald walking west on 10th Street towards where Tippit was supposedly shot. This witness was a William Smith, and he told the FBI that he noticed a man walking west on 10th Street as he was going to launch. This is before the shooting on 10th Street. So he saw this man walking west on 10th Street, and a couple paragraphs down he says, after seeing photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald, he feels sure that the man who walked by him going west on 10th Street while he, Smith, was going to lunch was Lee Harvey Oswald. However, when he was interviewed by the Warren Commission, this issue did not come up in the questioning. Now, there were two other witnesses, Markham and Scoggins, who claimed to have seen Oswald walking east on 10th Street at the intersection of Patton. This is not necessarily a contradiction. Oswald could very well have walked west on 10th Street from Marsalis, past Patton, and then turned around and walked back in the other direction. So it doesn't necessarily contradict the other witness testimony. But what it supports, that is this account by Smith, it supports the idea that Oswald was let off either by the bus, which I think was the original plan, or by Hill and Valentine at the intersection of Marsalis and 10th. And, of course, I think that's what happened. So I'm saying that Valentine and Hill gave Oswald a ride to the rooming house, and then took him from the rooming house to the scene of the supposed Tippit shooting. Hill and Valentine possibly were involved with the shooting action on 10th Street. I don't know. And I don't know what they would have done if they were. Perhaps they were... There's a report of a police car being in an alley at the scene of the shooting on 10th Street. Perhaps that was Hill and Valentine. I don't know what, if anything, they did there. They may have simply been supervising. And this would bring us up to the time where Hill is pretending to be riding with Sergeant Owens and using Sergeant Owens's call number. So that's the alibi time, the period of the ride to Oak Cliff with Oswald and the shooting on 10th Street. So I think while Hill was pretending to be riding with Sergeant Owens, he was actually in car 207 with Jimmy Valentine. Another thing that comes up an awful lot in discussion is that Gerald Hill, here he's using the call number 550 car 2. He keeps changing his numbers for some reason. But anyway, here he's in a car associated with his special assignment for the day, working for Captain Westbrook. He says the shells at the scene, the shooting scene on 10th Street, indicate that the suspect is armed with an automatic .38 rather than a pistol. In fact, the official story tells us that Oswald shot Tippit with a revolver, not an automatic. Hill later denied having said this on the radio, but it's an unambiguous fact. He did say this on the radio. What I think this indicates is that Hill had more knowledge of what really happened. I don't know if it means that he knew that Tippit actually was shot with an automatic in Dealey Plaza, or whether he knew that Oswald was carrying an automatic when he let him out of the car, even though that's not the gun that shot Tippit. I don't know what it means exactly, except that Gerald Hill is an insider in the conspiracy. In fact, I think it's possible that Gerald Hill himself might have shot Tippit in Dealey Plaza, and that he might be Shadow Man in the Botham photo. Some people have speculated that that might be Jack Ruby. I think that's a possibility too. But it could be that Jerry Hill himself shot J.D. Tippit in Dealey Plaza and shot him with an automatic, and that's how he knows that Tippit was shot with an automatic and not a pistol, as he says on the radio. And he didn't realize that Oswald was being set up with a revolver. And now going back to Oak Cliff after the shooting at the used furniture store, we have Gerald Hill here, not wearing his jacket for some reason. This makes me think that maybe he was involved with the shooting on 10th Street, and he wanted to look different than he looked in the rest of the photography, but he hasn't redressed himself yet. And these are my other identifications. I think Assistant District Attorney William Alexander is there, Sergeant Owens. James H. Taylor, the motorcycle officer, seems to be involved in some kind of a handoff. He's either putting something in Captain Westbrook's car or taking something out of Captain Westbrook's car, with Jerry Hill looking on. Captain Westbrook, I assume this is his car. That's what makes sense with the evidence, and I think he's probably sitting in the back seat there. And I have the person I believe to be Jimmy Valentine off on the right there, labeled so. And I think it's interesting that Hill at this time is not wearing his jacket. You can't tell whether he's wearing his necktie because you don't get to see the front of him. But I find this interesting because of the testimony of Aquila Clemens, or I should say the account of Aquila Clemens.
And you went out of the house. Did you see a man with a gun?
Yes, I did.
What was he doing?
Oh, he was reloading it. When I said he was reloading his gun.
And how would you describe that man?
Well, he's kind of chunky. He was kind of heavy. He wasn't a very big man.
Was he tall or short?
Yeah, he was kind of short guy.
Short and heavy?
Yes.
And was there any other man there?
Yes, there was one on the other side of the street. All I know, he told him to go.
Mrs. Clemens, the man who had the gun, did he make any motion at all to the other man across the street?
No more told him to go.
Well, he waved his hand and said, go on.
Go.
And then what happened with the man with the gun?
He unloaded and reloaded.
And what did the other man do?
Man kept going straight down the street.
And then did they go in opposite directions?
Yes, they were. They weren't together. They went this way from each other. The one done the shooting went this way. The other one went straight down past street that way.
What was the man who did not do the shooting, but the man who went in the other direction from the man with the gun? What was he wearing, if you remember?
Well, first I remember he looked like light khakis and a white shirt.
And was he tall or short?
He was tall.
And was he heavy or thin?
He was thin.
But the one who did the one who had the gun, seconds after Tippit was shot, he was short.
Yes, he
heavy.
was short and kind of heavy.
So Clemens says that after the shots had been fired and she came out of the house, she saw two people who seemed to be involved. One of them had a gun and one didn't, or she couldn't see the other one having a gun. She said the one with the gun was short and heavy. Now, she didn't describe the clothing of this short and heavy or short and chunky guy. She said the other one was wearing a white shirt. And this makes me wonder whether or not Jerry Hill took off his jacket in order to play this scene on 10th Street. It could be that Clemens is talking about him. He's wearing a white shirt, even though Clemens said it was the other guy wearing the white shirt. It's a confusing account from Clemens in that Mark Lane movie. But anyway, I think it's a possibility that Gerald Hill was involved in the shooting play that went on 10th Street, and that's why he took off his jacket and presumably took off his necktie too. And the next time we see Jerry, it's at the Texas Theater, after Oswald has been arrested and they're bringing Oswald out. And when we see Jerry here in this version of the photo from the 6th floor museum, we can see that he's once again wearing his hat and jacket and necktie. So he's put his uniform back on, so to speak, for Oswald's arrest. But if we compare this version of the photo, which I obtained, I forget when, but it was in the 2000s, to the version of the photo that came out with the Warren Commission report, we can see that Jerry's face is not visible in the Warren Commission version. And even looking at a close-up and increasing the brightness and contrast, there's no hint of a face there. So it looks to me as if the Warren Commission or somebody at the Warren Commission blacked out Jerry's face in this photograph. And perhaps the reason is that Jerry doesn't want to be recognized as being an actor in Oak Cliff for some reason. Also, I'll note here that in his Warren Commission testimony, Gerald Hill pretended that he did not know who this apparent motorcycle officer is in the photograph. And Mr. Belland just let that go. And we can see in the photography that as soon as they got into the car, Jerry Hill got on the car phone, presumably to report that everything went well. We have to presume because when they're on the car phone, we can't hear what they say. This is not the car radio, it's the car phone. It's a different system, and that was not recorded. I think this was helpful to the conspirators in faking the time of Oswald's arrest, because we have a time on the radio when it's first reported by Hill that Oswald had been arrested, but we can see in the photography that his first report of Oswald's arrest is on the car phone, and we don't know what time that was. And I've made a video about that, and I don't think I'm going to go through all the details of that here. But it shows that Jerry Hill was an insider, a conspirator in this affair. So according to me, through his associations with WBAP and Jack Ruby, Hill helped Ruby to sneak into the City Hall basement to shoot Oswald. Hill created an elaborate alibi for himself for the time covering 12:50 to 1:18 p.m., apparently proving that he had nothing to do with what happened in Oak Cliff. But in actuality, Hill and Valentine drove Oswald from the Texas School Book Depository to 1026 North Beckley. Hill and Valentine drove Oswald from 1026 North Beckley to Marsalis and 10th so that Oswald could be set up for the shooting on 10th. Hill helped to fake the arrest time for Oswald at the Texas Theater. And I think that Hill might actually have shot J.D. Tippit in Dealey Plaza. Also, I read somewhere that in his will, Hill left his body to science. Gerald Hill.